Welcome to the Jenna Ellis Show, sponsored by Legacy Precious Metals. There has never been a better time to invest in precious metals. Visit legacypminvestments.com. That's legacypminvestments.com. I'm Jenna Ellis. Join me on Jenna Ellis tonight for a very special episode where we are commemorating the 80th anniversary of the D-Day invasion. We'll talk about Joe Biden's fumble at his Normandy speech this morning, and then also what's going on in Congress with so much testimony coming out. Our very special guest, Congressman Jim Jordan, will join me for the first two segments, a lot to break down. And then we will have our Thursday roundup panel for their reaction to the Fauci testimony, what's going on with the Robert Hur investigation, and why won't the DOJ hand over that audio to Congress? Don't the American people have a right to know about Biden's cognitive decline? We're going to discuss all of this and more tonight on Jenna Ellis Tonight. Join us, Salem News Channel, 9 p.m. See you there. Hi friends, Jenna Ellis, host of Jenna Ellis Tonight, and we are experiencing instability at every level. Our government lacks leadership, and Bidenomics has been an utter disaster. The economy is in a fragile state. Inflation has been a constant issue. High interest rates have put significant pressure on the real estate market. There have been major bank failures, and many analysts say a stock market correction is likely overdue. We have global conflicts in Europe and the Middle East, and those have the potential to spread, but gold has soared to record highs even among the tensions. So there are so many reasons that Americans should consider wise investing and investments in gold and silver, and Legacy Precious Metals is the gold standard. I love Legacy Precious Metals because of their zero-hassle, education-first approach. They can help you roll your traditional IRA into a gold IRA or ship metals directly to your house. Go to legacypminvestments.com, download the free investor guide, and I have read it. There is so much valuable information there. Friends, now is the time to not roll the dice on your hard-earned money. Find out about the growth potential that is in gold and that gold offers you. Contact Legacy Precious Metals and make sure to tell them that I sent you. Good evening and welcome to Jenna Ellis Tonight. So a very grateful nation celebrated the 80th anniversary of D-Day when our soldiers invaded the beaches of Normandy, which was the turning point of World War II that led the Allies to an ultimate victory. And many members of Congress went over to Normandy this morning to bid their commemorations and just their salutes on behalf of a grateful nation. So 40 years ago, we had President Ronald Reagan that gave an amazing address. 4 years ago, we had President Donald Trump. And today, we had this. Look at Joe Biden.
Distinguished guests, please welcome the Honorable Lloyd J. Austin.
Obviously very confused, and we all remember Special Counsel Robert Hur's report that said that Biden was elderly and very well-meaning, but also very confused. And so the House in Congress has held some committee hearings regarding this, and also with Attorney General Merrick Garland, who refused to really answer questions about Special Counsel Hur's report and why the DOJ is refusing to give over that whole transcript. This is what Congressman Biggs had to say to Merrick Garland and really just grilled him. Listen to this.
Special Counsel Hur found that then former Vice President, President Biden, had retained and disclosed classified information. Isn't that true?
Mr. Hur has presented a long report.
Isn't that true? I mean, come on. I'm practically quoting right from it. You wouldn't disagree with that
I won't disagree
assessment.
I'm not going to comment on his report. He sets forth. I appointed him to investigate allegations about classified documents.
So the reason that we end up talking over you is because a simple question like that goes unanswered. You're non-responsive. You're non-responsive to the question. Because that is what Mr. Hur found. And then he also found, and you're not going to like this because I'm going to quote from it. From this, he basically says here that he found Mr. Biden to be sympathetic and here he is, a well-meaning elderly man with a poor memory. And so he made a prosecutorial decision that he wasn't going to prosecute. Are you going to dispute that? You're not disputing that, are you?
Mr. Hur's report.
Okay, you're going to say it stands on its own. Okay, so it stands on its own. No, because you're not intent on answering. You want to be non-responsive. You want to filibuster.
I'd like to answer your question.
Do you dispute that? So let's just face it. Mr. Biden has not been prosecuted, correct?
That's correct.
And the rationale given by Mr. Hur is because he was a sympathetic, well-meaning elderly man with a poor memory, and he thought the jury would have sympathy towards Mr. Biden.
That was one of a long list of reasons that Mr. Hur gave for his decision.
Give me one more reason.
He found that, look, I don't want to get into a discussion about this, but I will say one of them was that the president was completely cooperative in this matter.
That's the reason, huh? Okay, all right.
You asked me one of the reasons. That was one of the reasons.
The issue that we have here, you don't want to give us the audio tape. You don't want us to have the recording. But ultimately, the issue is whether the transcript actually supports the special counsel's determination.
Joining me now is Congressman Jim Jordan from the great state of Ohio, who's also part of the House Judiciary Committee and got to grill Merrick Garland as well. Congressman, he seemed very non-responsive and almost just rude to the committee. But why is it that the DOJ is not handing over this audio tape that would give Congress a lot more information, and the American people as well deserve to know Biden's cognitive level?
Yeah, it's a good question because they're asserting a privilege, executive privilege. But they've already given us the transcript. So they've already, I think, waived the privilege. I think it's important to understand the overall context. Remember, in Special Counsel Hur's report, he says on page 1 that Joe Biden knowingly kept classified information and knowingly disclosed classified information. Then on page 231 of his report, he tells us why he did so. He says Joe Biden had strong motivations for ignoring classified procedures because he was writing a book for which he got paid $8 million. So we have an $8 million motive. We have the elements of the crime, knowingly disclosing information that he's not supposed to disclose, and yet he's not charged. And he's not charged because of what Representative Biggs pointed out. He's an elderly gentleman who would be sympathetic to a jury because he can't remember things, but he'd appear sympathetic to a jury. That's what Special Counsel Hur said. What we're saying is, look, we deserve all the best evidence, the best evidence, particularly now that we're the Congress in the midst of an impeachment inquiry, an exclusive power that only the Congress has, the House of Representatives has. We need the best evidence, and the best evidence is the audio tape. But he refuses to give it to us, so we've held him in contempt in the committee, and I think the full House will hold the Attorney General in contempt of Congress next week on the floor.
Wow. And so for practical purposes, what would contempt of Congress mean? Because he's the head of the DOJ, so obviously he's not going to prosecute himself.
Yeah, and we may have to go to court on the issue. But again, this is something that if you're in contempt of Congress, this is, this can be, you don't give us information we're entitled to. This could be something that the next Justice Department looks at if they so desire. That's a decision for the next administration, next Attorney General, I should say. But it's what we can do. So we should use, in our oversight capacity, we should, under our constitutional system, we should be as aggressive as we can be, but we should do so obviously consistent with the Constitution. This is one of the powers we have. And that's why you'll see us, I think, vote on this next week in the full House and why I think it'll pass.
Yeah, and as you should, and I applaud that maneuver for sure. And so there is still this ongoing impeachment inquiry of Joe Biden. That's good to know. Is there a potential that if Merrick Garland refuses to cooperate with the subpoena and turn over the best evidence, that you would look at opening an impeachment inquiry against him as well?
I don't think that's likely. We're focused on a number of things. We're going to have legislation on the floor next week that will say that if you're a special counsel hasn't been approved by the United States Senate, you can't get federal funds and you can't go investigate. That addresses this Jack Smith issue. We have legislation that will pass next week that something we passed out of committee months ago, which would allow, if you're a former president or vice president and you're charged by one of these state prosecutors, these rogue district attorneys on a state level who go after a federal official, the president of the United States or former president of the United States or vice president, that individual would have the opportunity to move that, change the venue, move that from state court to federal court. In the situation of Alvin Bragg, this would have prevented this, because we know the federal court up there wasn't even going to bring this charge. But this would allow this to go to change a venue, move to federal court where you get a broader jury pool and everything else. So we think that's an important legislative. Again, we passed it out of committee last year, but it's going to be on the floor next week. So we're focused on those issues, as well as we've invited Mr. Colangelo and Mr. Bragg to come testify in front of the Judiciary Committee. We'll see if they agree to do so. If they don't, we'll look at compulsory means to get them in front of our committee as well.
Yeah, and I heard a testimony from AG Merrick Garland on the prosecutor that had this very weird, not even lateral move. It seems like he took a lesser job to go into the New York State DA's office from the DOJ and then just happened to end up prosecuting Trump there. And Merrick Garland goes, well, I suppose that he just applied for the job and got it. I mean, I didn't send him anywhere. Do you really believe that testimony?
One of the things we asked the Attorney General that he said he didn't know was what kind of communications exist between the Justice Department and Alvin Bragg in New York and Fani Willis down in Georgia. I mean, we know, for example, in Fani Willis' situation, that Nathan Wade had on the taxpayer dime had come to D.C., met with, it looks like, the January 6th committee, the White House counsel's office, and the Justice Department. So we want to know what kind of communications, what all happened there, and we've asked for that information as well. So we'll see. And the Attorney General response this week in the committee was, well, I don't know what kind of communication may or may not exist between those state DAs and folks here in Washington, D.C. So we want to get that information as well and find out, was this all coordinated? Because with Colangelo, remember, he started in New York with Letitia James in her office, came to DOJ, was one of the top people at the Justice Department here in Washington, and then goes back to New York to run the prosecution against President Trump. We think that's a little interesting, and we'd like to know about the communications that may or may not exist between the Justice Department and Alvin Bragg.
And so for some of the naysayers and some of the leftist pundits who are saying, okay, well, what does it matter if there was communication, and why is that a congressional, legislative oversight issue? What would you say to that is the main purpose for finding this out beyond, I think the American people should know?
If Alvin Bragg's office is talking with the White House counsel, Fani Willis's office is talking with the White House, this is Joe Biden running against President Trump, and they're going after President Trump. I think the people of the country would like to know what's going on there, because it sure looks like it's being justice is being done in a political fashion here. That is not supposed to be how this works. And never forget, Fani Willis doesn't bring charges against President Trump until after he declares he's running for president. Alvin Bragg said, I cannot envision a world where I would indict President Trump and call Michael Cohen as a prosecution witness. When he got the job, that's what he said, quote. But then he did exactly that after President Trump announces he's running for president. And Jack Smith isn't named special counsel until 3 days after President Trump announces he's running for president. So I think that all looks political too, for goodness sake. So that's the concern. You got the guy in the White House whose Justice Department looks like they're talking with these state prosecutors and naming a special counsel to go after their opponent after they realize who their opponent is, for goodness sake.
It's obviously political, but Congressman Jim Jordan, you're going to stay with us for one more segment because we want to get into the Dr. Fauci testimony in front of Congress. So much going on in Washington this week. We'll be right back with more here on Jenna Ellis Tonight. Well, friends, you might have heard that Mike Lindell and MyPillow no longer have the support of their box stores or shopping channels the way that they used to. They've been part of this cancel culture, so they want to pass along the savings directly to you by having a $25 extravaganza. I love that word, extravaganza. When Mike started MyPillow, it was just a one-product company. With the help of his dedicated employees, they now have hundreds of products, some you may not even know about. To get the word out, I want to invite my listeners to check out their $25 extravaganza. 2-pack multi-use My Pillows are just $25. My Pillow sandals, also awesome, only $25. Their 6-pack towel sets are $25. And brand new 4-pack dish towels, you guessed it, just $25. For the first time ever, the premium My Pillows with the all-new Giza fabric, just $25. And orders over $75 will receive free shipping too. This amazing offer won't last long. Go to mypillow.com, use the promo code Jenna, or call 800-564-8475 today. That's 800-564-8475, or go to mypillow.com and use the promo code Jenna. I'm back with Congressman Jim Jordan from the great state of Ohio and the chair of the House Judiciary Committee. And Dr. Fauci was also called to testify in front of Congress this week. And this is what Representative Rich McCormick put up on his X feed about that testimony.
I want to point out that I'm probably the only member of Congress that actually treated patients during the pandemic from the very beginning to the very end of the pandemic, during night shifts in the ER. Thousands of patients during that time. I was censored. My medical license was threatened because I disagreed with bureaucrats. Literally taken off the internet as a person who is treating patients with leading edge technologies, developing theories, but doing my very best, but being censored by the United States government for the first time, stepping in and taking the place of medical professionals as the experts in healthcare.
You were going to have schools, universities, and colleges are going to say, you want to come to this college, buddy? You're going to get vaccinated. Lady, you're going to get vaccinated. Yeah. Big corporations like Amazon and Facebook and all of those others are going to say, you want to work for us, you get vaccinated. And it's been proven that when you make it difficult for people in their lives, they lose their ideological bullshit and they get vaccinated.
Are all objections to COVID vaccinations ideological bullshit? Dr. Fauci, you've become Dr. Fear.
All right, Congressman, Dr. Fauci didn't really have a lot to say other than he admitted that he just kind of made up stuff like all of the social distancing, the masks for kids. I mean, will there ever be any accountability? I think a lot of Americans want to see him in jail. Do you?
There won't be that in this administration, maybe in the next administration with a new attorney general. But you're right, Dr. Fauci, just about everything he told us turned out to be wrong. I mean, remember, they said it wasn't in a lab in China. It didn't come from the lab, even though at this lab in Wuhan, China, they're doing this kind of research. Didn't come from a lab. I always say it was a bat to a pangolin to a hippopotamus to Joe Rogan, and then we all get the virus, you know. They said it wasn't gain of function research done at that lab. It sure looks like it was. They initially even were reluctant to say it was our tax money through a grant recipient that went to this lab where they were doing this kind of research. We know that's not accurate. And then, of course, they said the vaccinated can't get it. The vaccinated can't transmit it. Masks work. 6 feet social distance is based on science that we found out in his deposition. That just came out of nowhere, according to what Dr. Fauci said. And then maybe the biggest one is, for the first time in history, not just American, first time in history, there's no such thing as natural immunity. A first virus where there's no natural immunity. They downplayed all that. So it's no wonder Americans are frustrated with this guy. And then his push and that pressure to get people to do things, Americans were told you can't go to church, you can't go to school, you can't go to work because of this virus. That is not how our constitutional system is supposed to work. And they were told all these things by Dr. Fauci, a guy who never put his name on a ballot, went out and got elected to anything. He's a bureaucrat. Might be a smart bureaucrat, might be Dr. Fauci, but that's not how our system works. It's the people who get elected who make the decisions.
Yeah, so well said. So, what kind of accountability could Fauci face? I mean, the Congress does hold the purse strings, and I've talked with your colleague, Representative Bob Good, just this morning on radio, and he thinks that Republicans don't really have the political will to hold the Democrats' feet to the fire with some of these budget reauthorizations that are coming up before the end of Congress for fear of a government shutdown. What do you think is the solution?
Well, the power of the purse is important. And look, I'm all for it. That's why I voted against the big omnibus spending package a few months back. It's why, one of the things that bothered me in that package was we gave $200 million for a new FBI headquarters, for goodness sake. I mean, this is the same FBI who said, if you're a pro-life Catholic, you're an extremist. It's the same FBI who retaliated against whistleblowers who came and told us about the investigation of moms and dads at school board meetings and the investigation into pro-life Catholics in Richmond, Virginia. So, yeah, there's things like that where we should use the power of the purse. That's one of the powers, the primary powers the legislative body, the Congress, has to hold the executive branch in line. And we just haven't been doing that. I hope we do that much more. And it's next week, like as I said, we're going to have on the floor a bill next week, which would limit the monies going to a special counsel who hasn't been approved by the United States Senate. And this would go after Jack Smith, of course. So we should use the power of the purse.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Americans want to see some accountability. And I know that it's very difficult when you only have one chamber, you only have the House in terms of the majority. It's a very slim majority, right. And obviously not the White House. And this is why November is so important. And so in terms of the weaponization of government committees specifically, is there anything else that's coming out of that committee that you would like the American people to know in terms of heading into November and why that's so important? Because I think this term weaponization has been recast and recharacterized by, both the right and left, maybe a little bit out of proportion. But really, it seems to me that what you're doing is just making sure that everyone follows the law and that the Democrats aren't targeting their political opponents.
Yeah, and they certainly are targeting their political opponents. We see that as prime example number one is President Trump. But understand, just a few weeks ago, there was a gentleman who was shot and killed by the ATF agents for supposedly selling 6 guns without a license. And this guy was the top, highest paid official in the Little Rock municipal government, ran the Bill and Hillary Clinton Airport in Little Rock, Arkansas. And at 6:02 in the morning, the ATF agents show up at his door. First thing they do is cover the doorbell cam. Looks like they cut electricity to the house, and they didn't wear, even though they're supposed to, they weren't wearing any body cameras. So my question to Director Delbach was, what were you trying to hide? And then within 57 seconds of kicking in his door, 6:02 in the morning, he shot 57 seconds later. That seems to me like an aggressive government that's not operating the way it should be. So we have that. We have the political things going on with targeting Catholics and parents, and of course, President Trump. So we're going to, and then the censorship, the investigation we've done on censorship, where big government's pressuring big tech to censor conservatives. We know that took place, and we have a case that's all the way been argued at the Supreme Court on that too. So all those things are issues that we were involved in and that we investigated and did reports on and got information to the American public.
Yeah, and you're right to bring attention that this is much bigger than just targeting Donald Trump. That is just one aspect of the weaponization of government. This is against conservatives, it's against Christians, it's against Catholics, pro-lifers. I mean, all of these things are incredibly important, and we are waiting on some of those very important Supreme Court opinions. And so in just the last minute I have with you, Congressman, and so appreciate your time, what would be your message to the American people in terms of voting our values all the way down ticket to make sure that we can have stronger majorities and actually be able to accomplish more after November 2024?
Real simple, vote Republican. I mean, look, we got to get President Trump back in the White House. Everyone knows that. We need to take back the Senate. We need to keep the House. So vote Republican. If you're in one of those key states, those 7 states that now determine who's going to be president of the United States, Georgia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Nevada, Arizona, if you're in one of those 7 states, it's all the more important you get out and vote early. Most of those states have early voting. So get out and do that. That's what's at stake here. We know how good things were under President Trump. We know how bad they are under President Biden. That's the contrast. And so let's, and in many of those states, we got important U.S. Senate races. In Ohio, Bernie Moreno, great candidate, running against Sherrod Brown. In Pennsylvania, we got Dave McCormick running against Bob Casey. Dave McCormick's another great candidate. So we need to win those states too, so we can make the changes that need to be made in our government.
Yeah, well said. Congressman, thank you so much. We'll be right back with more here on Jenna Ellis Tonight. Hi friends, Jenna Ellis, host of Jenna Ellis Tonight, and we are experiencing instability at every level. Our government lacks leadership, and Bidenomics has been an utter disaster. The economy is in a fragile state. Inflation has been a constant issue. High interest rates have put significant pressure on the real estate market. There have been major bank failures, and many analysts say a stock market correction is likely overdue. We have global conflicts in Europe and the Middle East, and those have the potential to spread, but gold has soared to record highs even among the tensions. So there are so many reasons that Americans should consider wise investing, and investments in gold and silver, and legacy precious metals is the gold standard. I love Legacy Precious Metals because of their zero hassle, education first approach. They can help you roll your traditional IRA into a gold IRA or ship metals directly to your house. Go to legacypminvestments.com, download the free investor guide, and I have read it. There is so much valuable information there. Friends, now is the time to not roll the dice on your hard-earned money. Find out about the growth potential that is in gold and that gold offers you. Contact Legacy Precious Metals and make sure to tell them that I sent you. All right, let's get some reaction from today's Thursday Roundup panel. We have Robin Biro, who is a Democrat strategist, and we have Auron MacIntyre, who's a writer for The Blaze, and John Cardillo, who's former NYPD and GOP strategist. So let's start with this ridiculous performance by Joe Biden this morning. And his speech only lasted, a little less than, or maybe a little over 10 minutes or so, but it was definitely not what we saw from, say, President Reagan 40 years ago, or even Donald Trump about 4 years ago. So Robin, I got to start with you. Joe Biden is just very embarrassing. What was your reaction?
There's a reason that we kept him in the basement, Jenna, for as long as we did.
You're admitting it. Oh my gosh. Okay. You heard it here.
No, but serious. He was probably my fourth or fifth pick back in 2020, and he's what we ended up with. And now it's these many years later, and now we've got a president who's 81 years old and a contender who's 77. You add that up, that's 158 years. So, I mean, honestly, I think that, I could be wrong, but I think that the people want to see someone younger in office. I'm disappointed that we didn't get a younger candidate rise to the top on either the left or the right, because this is what we've got, and it's kind of unfortunate. And this is, exhibit A of what you get when you've got someone, I hate to sound that ageist, but when you've got someone that age.
Well, this is why retirement is a thing. And, maybe Dr. Jill Biden should just kind of escort him off the stage and keep him off the stage. But John, I think that it's very important that the American people know actually what Biden's cognitive level is here. And we just heard from Congressman Jim Jordan about, their grilling of AG Merrick Garland. And why aren't they turning over that audio tape to Congress? I think that's very relevant to the impeachment inquiry, but it's definitely relevant to the American people to know what exactly is going on here.
Yeah, I mean, look, the least transparent administration in history. As for Biden, Robin took the words out of my mouth. Robin and I have been going at it on air, but we never go at it. We always agree. I did the math today, Robin, for about 7 years now, and we tend to agree more and more. Yeah. But I thought Fauci was abysmal. I thought Garland was abysmal, and I think Biden put himself on display for just how cognitively deficient he is. My last point, though, is look at Dr. Jill Biden. Look at her reaction. Whenever he fumbles, whenever he gasps, whenever he goes to shake somebody's hand who isn't there or sit in a chair that doesn't exist, it's like, yeah, no big deal. It's business as usual. And she's got this angry look on her face like, oh, the cocktails didn't work, or how are we going to spin this? It was like when Hillary was collapsing in 2016 and the Secret Service's moves were almost choreographed. All right, throw her in the SUV, get her to the hospital, get her checked out, but nobody was freaking out. Nobody was worried. Same with Jill Biden. So I suspect Biden's condition is much, much worse behind closed doors.
That's a really good point that nobody seems particularly worried like they might if that was actually out of character. But
Yeah.
Auron, let's have you weigh in here where we are rapidly approaching the first debate. Is Joe Biden going to have to take a bunch of breaks? I mean, are we even going to address the cognitive issue? This is CNN we're talking about, so I don't really expect them to direct a lot of very difficult questions.
I mean, it's always kind of weird when we pretend that Joe Biden is actually the president. Like, yes, he formally holds the office. And sure, every president to some extent is a collection of their advisors. But it is very clear that Joe Biden in no real way actually functions as the president of the United States. I think even most people on the left understand that. And many of them have been okay with it for a while. I think the real question here is, will they continue to be okay with it? And then more and more we're hearing that people are not. It feels like there's some unrest that actually the ruling elite are looking at this and saying, maybe this isn't okay. Maybe we can't just weaken and Bernie's our way through an entire presidency. They're getting uncomfortable, and that's why you're really hearing the rumblings that we're hearing now.
Yeah, so well said. I mean, I posted on X this morning that no rational person can possibly think that Biden is genuinely mentally competent. I mean, there is just no way that anybody, even for all of the Democrats that want to prop him up on the left, there's no way that even Joe Scarborough is like sitting there in his home with Mika and, drinking Mai Tais and saying, oh yeah, totally, Biden is completely competent. But we'll be back with more of our Thursday Run-Up Power Panel when we come back right after this. And we're back with today's power panel, Robin Biro, Auron MacIntyre, and John Cardillo. And in the midst of all of these scandals of the Democrats, all of these ways that they have obviously either broken the law or they've just had completely hypocritical principles, now in the midst of the Supreme Court's term, and we're waiting on several very important cases from the Supreme Court, looking forward, the Democrats are trying to pin Justice Alito with some kind of bogus ethics charge because of a ridiculous flag controversy that is still ongoing. So this was an opinion piece by the Post-Gazette, and the whole thing is really worth reading. But it's by May Mailman, who says the concern with Justice Alito's ethics isn't about ethics. She goes on to say, Americans deserve a government dedicated to America's best interests, not the highest bidder. And yet, Senator Bob Mendez, a Democrat from New Jersey, is on trial for giving billions of your money to Egypt in exchange for gold bars and fancy cars. Representative Henry Keller, from a Democrat from Texas, has also been indicted on charges of accepting bribes more than $500,000 worth to benefit a Mexican bank. And someone please explain how millions in foreign payments to a drug-addicted Hunter Biden make any sense to gain influence over his vice president father. But when it comes to ethics reform, we're not supposed to care about that. No. We are asked to focus on Justice Samuel Alito. Alito's wife hung an American flag upside down 3 years ago, and the couple put up a Revolutionary War flag last year. Democrats argue Alito cannot assess the breadth of quote unquote obstruction in 18 U.S.C. 1512, the statute used to charge January 6th defendants. And so, John, my question is, why isn't Hunter Biden actually being charged with all of the things related to Burisma and all of the influence and the foreign money from Ukraine to Biden and all this stuff? No, he's on this like ridiculous gun charge that the left is now propping up as saying, hey, we respect the rule of law here. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, it's window dressing. It's the one charge that wouldn't blow back on Joe Biden. But the even bigger issue here is, why wasn't Hillary Clinton charged for the same crimes Donald Trump was in New York when she funneled money through her law firm, Perkins Coie, who funneled that money to Fusion GPS, who funneled that money to Chris Steele to create a bogus dossier to influence the 2016 election? What Hillary did was far more egregious, because that dossier was picked up and used as fact, not only by leftist media, but by the Department of Justice, and used to obtain FOIA warrants to secretly spy on Americans. I mean, that rabbit hole runs so deep it cuts through the other side of the earth. Hillary walked on that. So there are absolutely two standards. And anybody who argues that there aren't two standards of criminal justice, ethics, hearings, etc., is lying to your face, because they know it well.
Yeah, well, so Robin, as the Democrat on the panel, what say you to that? I mean, I think that politicians on both sides are corrupt. Certainly we can point out, Republicans and Democrats that are hypocrites here, but the Democrats really are weaponizing the government to target political opponents. And I do agree with John that it seems like this Hunter Biden thing is totally a sham. And now they want, Justice Alito to step back just because his wife hung a flag outside of their vacation home.
I've got to be intellectually honest here about that. I've been reading all of the stories about the flag, and I read his response, and it seems to me much ado about nothing. I would be much more concerned with what what Justice Thomas was alleged to have taken on, like trips and vacations. And not disclosing the finances of those. But they did address that. They have made changes to those laws, and they now have to report that. Great. But the flag thing, I think, is a stretch. I really don't get it, not just as a Democrat, but as just an American. It doesn't make any sense to me, Jenna, to be honest.
Yeah, and I love how you phrase that, not just as a Democrat, but as an American, because it seems like we can't just come together as Americans often. We have to just be siloed into party politics. And that's what a lot of the other, mainstream media networks would like to do. They just are mouthpieces for the two big political parties. And it's very refreshing to have, a panel like this where we can actually talk about things, not just the talking points of the two major parties. And so, Auron, with that, I don't trust anyone in Congress on both sides to put in place a code of ethics, because obviously that is going to be weaponized against the U.S. Supreme Court. And all that's doing is putting more oversight attachment to the justices than the Constitution requires, and also that the Constitution, I would think, desires, and our founders desired, because the judiciary still needs to remain independent.
Yeah, I don't think anyone here is under the illusion that the spouses of the liberal justices don't have political opinions or anything like it. That it's very clear why Alito and Thomas are being targeted here, because they are the anchor of a conservative Supreme Court. The left were fine with an activist judiciary when it was being used to destroy democracy in their favor, when it was running roughshod over the opinions of people when it came to something like gay marriage or any of these other issues that were not determined by actual votes, but were instead determined by judicial fiat. And now the conservatives have control of court. The conservatives, for once, actually learned a lesson. They learned how the system really works. It's not about votes. It's about positions. They understood how to lobby for and secure the control of an institution that could actually advance their interests. And all of a sudden, it turns out the judiciary isn't the savior of the republic. It's actually a danger to democracy. And it just turns out that the two most stalwart conservative justices are the ones with all the ethics violations. What a surprise. I can't imagine how this happened.
Right. I mean, I think that was so perfectly snarkily summed up. And, moving forward, John, I think that Chief Justice Roberts rightly declined to go and have a closed door meeting with two Democrat senators, and saying, that looks very partisan. And the Supreme Court and the justices have so far declined to participate in any auspices of politicking. But they are going to have to rule on issues like, for example, presidential immunity. And, some of these things that look very political to the American people, but are actually genuine issues of law that need to be decided. And so is there any concern that a lot of this coming from the Democrats is putting pressure on the Supreme Court to be so concerned about political optics that they don't actually do their job?
Well, I don't think that Alito and Thomas are going to cave. I have little faith in Roberts because we've seen him cave on other issues. But it's so preposterous. I mean, the wife of a justice exercised her First Amendment rights 3 years ago. And that somehow translates to him not being able to be impartial and rule or hand down a decision based on the rule of law in 2024. It's preposterous. This is simply a media campaign to pressure the justices, to shame them, to have pressure put on their families, their kids, their staffers, their neighbors, their relatives, so that those people tell them, hey, just go along with the Democrats. They're ruining our lives. Because the journalists are not journalists anymore. They're activists at the Washington Post and at the New York Times. They'll go out there and act as an opposition research wing of the Democratic Party, or like a gawker, a smear wing of the Democratic Party. So no, I don't think this is going to have an impact on the justices. And I hope that what it does is have the reverse impact. It pisses them off even more, and it makes them move more to the right.
Yeah, well, and hopefully, they will just stay in their lane and completely ignore all of the ridiculous politicking. But, Auron, this also raises the point that Democrats, as you mentioned, they were saying that the Supreme Court, it's super precedent. They cannot ever be questioned when they were issuing opinions in their favor. But now all of a sudden that there's a conservative majority, now all of a sudden we need court packing and all of this. And so how likely do you think it is that the Democrats are actually going to push to expand the seats on the U.S. Supreme Court?
I think it's unlikely that they'll actually secure any structural changes to the Supreme Court, but I think you'll continue to see the intimidation of justices. The White House did not hesitate when Roe was on the table to tell crowds to illegally go protest and go to the point where we receive death threats for Supreme Court justices in order to intimidate people. We know what's happening here. They want to invalidate the court. They want to call the court into question. That's going to be the tactic. It's going to be relentless attacks by the media. It's going to be personal smears on their character, attacks on their spouses, pressure on their staff. This is going to be the relentless campaign. The whole point is going to be to cow the justices, hoping that they go ahead and dial back their opinions in order to look good in front of the media or the court of public opinion, rather than rendering an actual decision based on the law.
Yeah, well, hopefully the Supreme Court and all of the 9 justices stand firm and are not given to any sort of partiality from the media, but we'll continue to see when they issue that ruling on the all-important presidential immunity case and others. But we'll be right back with the last segment with our Roundup panel right after this. And we're back with our power panel for the last topic of Thursday's roundup with Robin Biro, Democrat strategist, Auron MacIntyre, a writer for The Blaze, and John Cardillo, who is a Republican and GOP strategist. And gentlemen, this is unfortunately Pride Month, but I think that in speaking of the Democrats just kind of overplaying their hand all the time, it seems like the American culture is just getting tired of the Rainbow Mafia just throwing everything at us relentlessly for the month of June. I mean, I remember being in New York, and this was pre-pandemic, and literally nowhere you went in downtown Manhattan, there wasn't just this ginormous rainbow flag or all of these rainbow colors of everything. I mean, it was worse than Christmas, to be honest. I mean, so now the NFL, and this coming from Trending Politics, there are 11 NFL teams that refuse to participate in Pride Month. A growing backlash against the propagation of Pride Month celebrations has come to the NFL after the leaders of 11 teams made it known that their franchises will not be recognizing the designation. So, Robin, let's go to you first. I mean, I think this is a great thing. Like, just leave all of the cultural politic nonsense out of sports. Like, can't we just return to all being Americans?
I want to make one point clear here. Look, I am an openly gay man. I've been out since I was like 16 years old. But I've got to be honest here. June 1st, every corporation flips their logos to be rainbow logos. This is a money grab, and the NFL is no different. It's a for-profit organization. This is a money grab. They're not really donating any funds to causes that would advance, equal rights for the community. It's only a money grab. It's disingenuous at best, because I'll tell you what, July 1st, all these corporate businesses change their logos right back and forget that it ever happened. So, I'm over it. Maybe I'm a jaded old gay man, but I'm just over it. And that's where I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, well, I appreciate your honesty. I mean, and because John, I mean, I'm very openly heterosexual, but at the same time, like, I don't care to just say that my sexuality defines me, or that I need to go and thrust it in the faces of people. And it seems like, Pride Month celebrates literally every iteration of random genders and, queer theory and all of this nonsense that the leftists can derive, other than the union between one man and one woman, which is how God created us in Genesis 1. And so, I mean, this seems like, again, the left is just overplaying their hand, and finally there is some common sense in the NFL. What say you?
Yeah, look, I agree with Robin. It's a money grab. There's a good graphic floating around on social media of the logos of all these major corporations here in the United States, as opposed to the logos of their Middle East divisions, which are their regular old logos, right? They're playing to a crowd, and here in the States are like 150 people who control the media, PR, and corporate comms narratives. 99.9% of them are far leftists. So they're shoving this stuff down the throats of the C-suite, the boards and the decision makers. And you got those remnants, those DEI remnants that are phasing out, but still left there, taking Custer's last stand. It's their Alamo. They're going to shove this down throats more. But all it does is turn off a portion of the customer base. If there is no Pride Month celebration within a brand, if there's no Black History Month celebration within a brand, you're not going to lose customers for doing nothing to offend someone. Now, the bigger one for me is naval special warfare. The military should never be a social experiment. The military should never be a cultural experiment. Robin was a special operator. He's an Army Ranger in the regiment. So I think he would agree with me on this. And so, again, to his point, I think he's 100% right. I think this only moves the needle going forward in a negative direction for the corporations and the institutions that play in.
Yeah, well, and maybe that's more of where these 11 teams are coming from. But Auron, your thoughts on all this?
Yeah, I do think it's true that most people are becoming wary of American Ramadan. The state religion is just exhausting and no one wants to see it everywhere. But I would say that the NFL is still pretty cynical. I hadn't watched football in a long time, and last year I finally turned on some games for the first time. I was like, oh yeah, I enjoy this. I forget why I wasn't watching this. And then immediately the NFL went ahead and condemned Harrison Butker for saying that he loves his wife and it's a good thing that she's a mother. They don't go out and condemn all the rapists and all the violent actions from their players, but they do condemn a guy who's a Christian and says, actually, it's a good thing that my wife takes care of my family. So ultimately they can change colors. They can not change colors. I know these people hate me. I'm not going back to watching their product. I don't think anyone else should either.
Yeah, well, really well said. And, Robin, I'll give you the last word on this in the last 30 seconds. Where does our culture go from here when it seems like Pride Month really is just about hating, Christians, white people, straight people? I mean, it's like basically everybody that isn't included in the Rainbow Mafia.
I struggle sometimes with Pride Month, but I have to remind myself that there are people who think that they'd be better off dead than coming out. So it exists for that reason. But I think that we shouldn't be maybe celebrating all of our differences, maybe just love one another as human beings.
And pro-America. So because, I'm saying today, USA, USA. So thank you for your service in the military, Robin, as well. That's all the time we have for Jenna Ellis tonight. And I'll see you tomorrow for a great Friday show.